and welcome to another episode of Bespoke Architects Daily Pinup. I'm Nicole Walters, Director of Bespoke Architects, and I'm about to show you what made our Pinterest boards today. It's quite a small collection today, not the huge amount of information that we saw come through after the long weekend yesterday, but there was some very inspiring shapes, staircases as usual, and some kitchens that we'll talk about. So let's just start up here with this top little image. Now this is an extraordinary little temporary structure that's been built. It's just, I loved the shapes, the cantilevered form, the contrasting material. There's shingles on this part and rough sawn logs on those darker sections of that. I just thought it was an exquisite little structure. It is a viewing, you climb into it to look at things. It's well worth checking out as a project, but just that as a shape in the landscape is beautiful. Similarly, the UR house, I pinned that for the cantilevered giant sort of gable end that we see on the end, the contrast between the two gables. This one's transparent, this one's solid with tiny little windows, the way it cantilevers out over their car parking, and then the way they've landscaped up towards that rear gable structure. That as a composition, again, I talk a lot about composition, and it's similar to painting, where we're creating this composition to present to the street and how that just can be divine when detailed correctly. So that's why that one made the board. I really enjoyed this as an outside concrete sink. I haven't seen too many of these, but there is a requirement if you're into gardening. You always like to have a potting station. This would work well in that scenario. I do love concrete as a material. I do have a concrete kitchen sink at home, so I do think they make a wonderful sturdy sink. But to see it or wall mounted like this, and for external purpose, I really enjoyed that as a design solution. Again, this house was a bit concrete influenced, so this is the staircase for it here, and that cantilevered structure up there appears to be an LED strip light mid-level on that landing. That detail as a concrete light, and this one here, exquisite use of concrete in different ways to what potentially we see here in Australia, and that's always why the images make our board. If there's something outside of standard, I will pin it, and I will try to pin it on the appropriate board on our Pinterest page. But if you do come here and want to see the most recent pins that I do, if you just hit the pin button up there, you will be able to see everything from today's video. While I was on stairs, another plywood spiral staircase. I love the way the spine is on this spiral staircase. It's not a vertical straight up pole. And again, those cantilevered treads are really, really beautiful. It's almost organic in the way that it looks coming through that concrete hole. And the balustrade, just be mindful here in Australia, that would be non-compliant with the building code. We will need to put some sort of infill in that to prevent fall, but it is just as an exquisite looking staircase from the same concrete project. So that's why that one made the board. Another staircase that made the board was this one here. It's a timber open tread with the steel mesh handrail. It's offering transparency and light through it. It is part of this little house here. And if you do click onto that pin and follow through to the project, you'll see that staircase has a skylight above and acts as a light shaft down the multiple levels of this dwelling. So it was a really nice staircase, and an interesting choice when using it as a light well to actually then use a black mesh instead of perhaps a white or a glass. So interesting choice of materials. So that's why that one made the board. And again, the way it presents to the street with all these layers, there's depth there. This portion, this shape here sticks forward. This long vertical element is receding. Then there's a gap and there's some greenery hanging down. Then there's the carport underneath. I mean, the way that window follows the roof line. I mean, it's just a beautiful, again, composition, as I say, to the street. And it's super interesting. Far more interesting than either one of its neighbours in that image, I would say. This kitchen made the board today for its use of materials. I really enjoyed the task lighting that we talk about so frequently, the layout with the sink on the island bench and then our cooking station at the back. But it was really about the overheads for me on that project, and we see a gap there where we would expect to see a range hood normally. So that was quite interesting, I felt. This one here is I've put on our alfresco board. So that's, you know, alfresco areas are the spaces where we come from the inside and we transcend out, and it's usually where we've got our outside living spaces and our outside dining spaces. This one is quite contained, even though it's outside. Obviously we're above natural ground line. I'm saying that from the shape of these trees, so we're up on a upper level here, but they've chosen to go with that solid balcony rather than a glass balcony, and it's got this beautiful timber lined alfresco ceiling. So that's a really beautiful alfresco, and the way that that solid balustrade and that solid ceiling element frame the view of those treetops is just a really delightful way to sort of view the landscape, rather than just being shown a mass of glass that would require cleaning as well. But so that was just I felt like a really beautiful way to do a balcony. Over here, this is that same property, and you can see it is on quite a slope, and the way that the two levels in this property interact with each other. We've got this huge double-story void for the lower level, and then this smaller upper void, smaller single story sort of up the top here, and we can see the way that those two spaces interact. I just thought that was really beautiful. I pinned this one, it's on our fireplace board. That empty rectangle in that back corner of the image there is in fact the fireplace, but equally it could go on the window furnishings board or the materials board with that choice of tile, concrete, timber, what appears to be a painted product out there on that cantilever canopy out there, but just a stunning presentation of a lounge room. And then again, we look at the scale of the artwork that's been put on that wall. It's just a stunning lounge room and a stunning image of a lounge room. This one I pinned, it's up on the landscaping board, and I think I put it on fire because they're sitting around a fire pit on this lower level, but I love it. It's so minimal. The composition of the house, it's a very simple structure. It's an A-frame gable roof, 2-story. There's no ins and outs. We're not seeing the depth and the intricacy of this sort of composition here or this one here. This is quite box-like in its appearance. And then the way they've chosen to sort of make these giant terraces of concrete that then step down and then terrace again. And then they've put a solid balustrade here, obviously where the slope picks right up on this hillside here. It was fascinating. The length of this almost looks like a shadow, but it's longer than the building. I just really enjoyed that as a landscaping solution to that property. And winding up today, another staircase. That's an open staircase again, so similar to this one up here where we've got our open timber treads, but then it's gone for the solid white balustrade. So not letting as much light through on the staircase itself. The lower level does have a glass balustrade, but when sitting in that space, that staircase actually presents as a lighter structure than the more open mesh, and that is purely due to colour. So the mesh is black on this one. It makes it feel like a dark and heavy staircase. On this one, there's a much heavier use of white and glass. So even though it's got solid sides, it feels like a lighter structure. So often it's not the material choice, but the colour that can influence the way objects and materials and elements sit within a space. This kitchen here I pinned. I really liked that island bench. I believe one of those light fittings is actually a range hood over that cooktop there. But again, it's just that light, airy island bench and then the contrasting material on this side, and that feeling like there's no kicker underneath that kitchen. It just feels infinitely large. I really like the materials of that kitchen. And again, this is that same amazing gable structure from this. Here it is from another view. You can see that it is on 2 stories. You can see that the lower level is all about car parking, and then the step up from where you obviously enter with your cars. Again, it's so simple. It's such a contrasting elevation compared to these other 2 that we've pinned today. So that was all the inspiring things from the internet over the overnight, but again, obviously there's still Easter in other parts of the world. We're just ahead here in Australia. And so finally, I've ended on the Bespoke Derbyshire House 7. If you haven't had a chance to check that video out on YouTube or Instagram, it is also now up on Pinterest. It is an amazing little renovation in Point Lonsdale. The original fishing shack that was on the site has now had an amazing sort of contemporary, very much in the style of this modern barn attached to the back of it, but we use a mix of recycled bricks and concrete and weatherboard, and it's just a beautiful little project to have a look at if you've got a spare 3 minutes. Thank you so much for joining me today on another episode of Bespoke's Daily Pinup. I look forward to showing you tomorrow what inspiring things are out there on the web. Thanks for joining me. Bye.